battle was fought on Easter Sunday, 1865. So obviously it was right at the end of the war. In fact, it was a week to the day after General Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to General Grant at Appomattox in Virginia. The situation was this, that there were federal cavalry units roaming through the South. The men who came here, the Union soldiers that came here, were cavalry regiments that were part of General James Wilson's cavalry army that had fought a pretty big battle at Selma on April the 2nd and against General Forrest. Wilson was preparing to move on Columbus. He knew there were a lot of Confederates in Columbus. There were a lot of Confederate supplies, and he was preparing to attack Columbus. He was concerned that the Confederates at Columbus were going to burn the bridges over the Chattahoochee there, so he sent a brigade of cavalry, about 3,700 men, up the west bank of the Chattahoochee toward West Point to seize the bridges here, because he thought that he might need them as an alternate crossing point. When those men got here, they encountered a small dirt fort on the top of a hill that had 3 cannon in it and was defended by Confederate forces. The fort was there to defend the bridges and the railroad center that was located in West Point. General Tyler, who was from Tennessee, had been posted here. There were Confederate regulars here. There were soldiers that had fled Montgomery and Selma coming through here. The federal units that came here were 2 regiments from Indiana, 1 from Wisconsin, and 1 from Kentucky. And the overall commander of that group was a man from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, named Oscar LaGrange, and he was a Union colonel. And his scouts got here in the morning on April the 16th, Easter Sunday, and the Union forces took high ground west of the fort in hills that are in what is now Lynette, and set up batteries and began to shell the fort, and the Confederate troops were shooting back at the Union forces with their cannon. After that, the Union forces dismounted and assaulted the fort on foot. The fighting started about 10 o'clock in the morning and didn't end until about 6 or 6:30. You know, it was not a big battle as Civil War battles go. Just a few men fell on both sides. But General Tyler was one of the casualties on the Confederate side. If there's a story about the battle at Fort Tyler, to me this has been it. And this has always stuck with me, always amazed me, that General Tyler and his men, the few soldiers that were here, the civilians, even schoolboys in the fort, they didn't know exactly what was coming at them, but they knew that it was a sizable federal force, and they knew pretty well, I think, what direction they were coming from, and they knew that they were veterans, that they were battle-tested, well-equipped Union soldiers. Some of Tyler's subordinates actually tried to persuade him to abandon the fort, cross the river, go to the east side of the river, and if necessary make a stand there. And he refused. They didn't know that Lee had surrendered. They didn't know the president had been assassinated. There were a lot of things, it's true, they didn't know, but there were a lot of things they did know. They knew that the war was lost. They knew that they didn't have much of a chance to win this fight. And yet they stayed on that hill and fought. That has always intrigued me. They had the opportunity and the time to abandon the fort and flee and avoid this fight, and they deliberately chose not to. an incredible act of defiance, I think, of courage in face of hopeless odds at a time when, they must have known that, there was really not much of a point to this, and they did it anyway. And it's made especially sad, I think, by the fact that because of the other things that were happening that they did not know about, that had they fled to the other side of the river and bought whatever time that gave them, that might have been enough time for them to learn that Lee had surrendered, that the president was dead, that General Sherman was closing in on General Johnston in the Carolinas, and that the war was coming to an end everywhere. If they had fled the fort and given themselves a couple of days to learn those things, there would have never been a fight at all, and these men would have survived the battle and been able to go home. And didn't happen.